Hello again. I'm always interested in what was once known as pious frauds. These were occasions when the church would deliberately lie to the faithful or stage some false miracle, justifying the deceit on the grounds that it strengthened faith and thus saved souls for Jesus ultimately. This meant that even if you knew that some relic of a saint was not genuine, there was no harm in telling people that it was, as this would make them better Christians. This kind of thing was very popular during the Middle Ages, but has rather died out in the modern world. Well, I should say that it was dying out, but the truth is that the pious fraud has made an astonishing comeback and is now to be found alive and well in the field of race relations. Two recent examples will show what I mean. 6 months ago, the report of the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities was published. It had been chaired by Tony Sewell, who is black, and almost all those involved in producing it were also black or belong to various ethnic minorities. I give a link to the report in the description to this video. Among the findings of the Commission were that there is no evidence of institutional racism in Britain and that white people have a lower life expectancy in this country than any other ethnic group. White liberals at once attacked these findings, and both the Guardian newspaper and also the British Medical Journal asserted that what was said in the report was untrue and that actually black people had a lower life expectancy than whites. The British Medical Journal have now, 6 months later, been forced to admit that what they said was false and that black Africans in this country live longer on the whole than white people. I give a link to a news item on this as well. The point here is that even as they were claiming that ethnic minorities have a lower life expectancy than white people, both the Guardian and the British Medical Journal knew very well that what they were saying was untrue. They felt justified in telling these lies, though, because they were doing it in a good cause, and they were worried that if people knew the truth of the matter, which is that black people in Britain live longer than white people, that it would damage the cause of anti-racism. In other words, this was a classic instance of a pious fraud. These were educated and well-informed people telling deliberate falsehoods in what they thought was a good cause. They felt that the truth would harm people's faith, and so they were justified in misleading everybody and spreading lies. Another glorious case of this kind of pious fraud emerged earlier this week when it was learnt that a college at Cambridge University is running compulsory classes on racism for new students. These were described as mandatory anti-racism workshops, which sounds quite scary. It was the usual nonsense about white privilege, microaggressions and so on, but then came a PowerPoint slide which claimed that whiteness is the default on the internet and that Google was actually racially biased in favour of white people. The specific claim was made that, and I quote, Google search images are white people unless you specify otherwise. This is another beautiful instance of a pious fraud. Whoever wrote that sentence knew very well, just as we know, that it was completely false, but feeling that the end justified the means, he or she went ahead anyway. I invite viewers to try a few experiments themselves about this, just to see what the truth of the matter is. I tried Googling doctors and found that of the first 40 people's faces which came up, fewer than half were white. Googling happy child, I found that of the first 30 faces which appeared in the image search, just 7 were white. Google athlete, and only 6 of the first 30 people to come up are white. I rather suspect that most viewers will already know that Google is not, to say the least of it, biased towards white people in the search results. I'm sure we've all Googled happy white woman, for example. The person running the anti-racism workshop who wrote Google search images are white people unless you spec otherwise knew, as the words were typed on the keyboard, that this was a barefaced lie, and hoped that people would either not know this, or if they did, that they would keep quiet. The pious fraud in action. I have to say that I have watched with great pleasure the resurgence of a phenomenon which was almost extinct in this country until a decade or two ago. These are just 2 trifling aspects of this kind of thing in the anti-racist movement. These people justify deception of this kind on the grounds that we don't really know what is right and proper, and so must be fed lies which will get us on board with the correct way of thinking. This is precisely the attitude of the medieval church when they fobbed people off with dodgy translations of scripture or the leg bone of some martyr or other. They are, in fact, maintaining a very ancient tradition.